Nick Shirley just dropped a bombshell before Congress that's got Tim Walz scrambling for cover. Federal investigators are confirming what whistleblowers have been screaming about for months. Minnesota isn't just mismanaging taxpayer dollars. They're running what appears to be the largest welfare fraud operation in American history. Zombie offices, phantom healthcare providers, and millions vanishing into thin air. But here's the kicker that nobody saw coming. You see, your tax dollars aren't just being wasted. They're funding a sophisticated criminal enterprise that reaches from Minneapolis to Washington, D.C., to terror networks overseas. We're talking about hundreds of millions in fraudulent Medicaid claims, fake child care centers collecting federal funds, and shell companies masquerading as legitimate healthcare providers. This is not incompetence. It's organized crime with government badges. The HHS deputy secretary himself had to fly to Minnesota to confront state officials because the corruption runs so deep. If they can pull this off in Minnesota, what's happening in your state? Every American family is subsidizing this fraud through their federal taxes while legitimate healthcare providers go bankrupt. And speaking of healthcare fraud making people sick, let me tell you about something that actually works. If you're like me, and you're getting into that age where your body just feels sluggish and off all the time, then listen up, because recently I wasn't feeling so great. I decided to call my friend Dr. Josh for some help. I told him what was going on. His response was shocked. He said that most people's livers are overloaded with toxins from processed foods and medications and environmental pollutants. Unlike these fraudulent Minnesota healthcare scams stealing your money, Ultra Liver from Up Wellness actually delivers real results. It's a scientifically formulated blend that helps your liver detoxify naturally, giving you back that energy and mental clarity that you've been missing. While politicians waste your healthcare dollars, at least you can take control of your own health. You'll find the links in the description. But wait until you hear what investigators found inside that abandoned cannery in Minnesota. Federal agents discovered dozens of fake Medicaid providers, all registered to the same empty building. We're talking about a sophisticated money laundering operation that would make the mob jealous. And here's the part that'll blow your mind. Similar zombie offices are now popping up in Maine, Wisconsin, and Michigan. This is not isolated to Minnesota anymore. President Trump at Davos explodes the myth of tabula rasa, that people are blank slates regardless of the culture they come from. President Trump offers a backhand compliment to the Somali bandits who stole $19 billion from U.S. taxpayers.
Just came out. But equally importantly, we're cracking down on more than $19 billion in fraud that was stolen by Somalian bandits. Can you believe that Somalian? They turned out to be higher IQ than we thought. I always say these are low IQ people. How did they go into Minnesota and steal all that money? And we have, they're pirates. They're good pirates, right? But we shoot them out of the water just like we shoot the drug boats out. They're not pirating too many boats lately, do you notice? When they go out into those boats, they want to take over $1.5 billion tanker loaded up with oil. And they say, we're going to blow up your boat. They have powerful weapons. You hit the side of the boat, you blow the whole thing up. The insurance companies are petrified. So they say, just give them the boat. We'll give them money instead. And I don't do that. We blow them right the hell out of the water. We see them going out. We blow them out of the water. We don't have any pirates so much anymore. If we do, they won't be there long. We've cut down with the hitting of the boats that are loaded up with drugs, including submarines. Can you believe they actually buy small, they call them mini subs, very fast. They're meant for drugs. We've knocked out 2 of them. The Democrats say they were fishing. You have ruined somebody's fishing weekend, I would say. A submarine is not a fishing boat. You don't fish. But we've knocked down drugs by water, the oceans, the sea, by 97.2%. Think of that. And I actually say, who the hell are the 3%? Because I would not want to be piloting one of those boats. We knocked them down, and now we're going to start on land. We're going to knock it all out. The land is the easy part. What we did on sea is incredible, and that's our great military. The situation in Minnesota reminds us that the West cannot mass import foreign cultures which have failed to ever build a successful society of their own. I mean, we're taking people from Somalia, and Somalia is a failed, it's not a nation. Got no government, got no police, got no military, got no nothing. And then we have this fake congressperson who they just reported is worth $30 million. You believe this? Ilhan Omar, talking about the Constitution that provides me. She comes from a country that's not a country. And she's telling us how to run America. Not going to get away with it much longer, let me tell you. The explosion of prosperity and conclusion and progress that built the West did not come from our tax codes. It ultimately came from our very special culture. This is the precious inheritance that America and Europe have in common. We share it. We share it, but we have to keep it strong. We have to become stronger, more successful, and more prosperous than ever. We have to defend that culture and rediscover the spirit that lifted the West from the depths of the Dark Ages to the pinnacle of human achievement. We live in an incredible, changing period. It's an unbelievable time, but we have to take advantage of the time that we're in. In our hands are technologies that our ancestors could scarcely have. I mean, they couldn't have even dreamt some of the things that we see today. And so rapidly they're produced. I mean, AI, 2 years ago, nobody ever heard of the term, and now everybody's talking about it. And it can have some very good purpose. It could also have some dangerous purpose. And for that, we have to watch out. But some tremendous things are happening because of it.
President Trump at Davos, his comments about Somali fraud sets the stage for what former police officers actually witnessed on the ground in Minnesota. Check this out. Former Minnesota police officer Scott Dexter on the Minnesota daycares that defrauded Minnesotans while Tim Walz watched. This from the committee hearing today.
The highest funded centers were reviewed first, and many of those centers were referred to us through the public tip line or by licensing inspectors who observed activity inconsistent with a legitimate daycare operation. What we found was deeply concerning. Many of these centers operated out of commercial spaces with windows totally covered, no visible play areas, and very few children ever present. Through surveillance, data collection, and review of attendance and billing records, we repeatedly documented patterns of overbilling, non-existent attendance, and in some cases, children being signed in for hours they were never actually at the center.
Never actually there. So it all started with Nick Shirley. Now we're in congressional committee investigations. The police testimony about the covered windows and missing children leads us directly to the star witness who brought these findings to Congress today. Nick Shirley blasts Tim Walz over Minnesota fraud in his opening statement. God bless this guy.
A learning center spelled Quality Learning Center instead of Quality Learning Center. They had received $1.9 million, yet with that $1.9 million, they could not even spell Leering right on their sign. Governor Walz has said he's been fighting fraud in Minnesota since 2019 and said the buck stops with him. However, how long would it take for you to notice $1 million leaving your bank account not knowing where it's going? That's essentially what had been happening in Minnesota for years as billions of dollars has been misplaced. And meanwhile, while people like Governor Tim Walz call people like me a white supremacist, delusional conspiracy theorist, he actually decided to drop out of re-election because I believe of how deep and extensive this fraud is. Since my reporting, the HHS department froze over $185 million, and to this day, not a single business has been able to prove proof of legitimacy. How fast would you be proving that you are a legitimate business if you have children to actually feed and to take care of? You'd be sending in that paperwork instantly.
That was only a snippet of Mr. Shirley Goes to Washington. The opening blast against Walz is only the appetizer. Wait to hear the devastating testimony that continues. Nick Shirley was the big name in today's hearing on Minnesota fraud, but former investigator Scott Dexter provided particularly stunning testimony about being labeled a racist by state officials who he says then punished his team for what they uncovered, effectively crushing their work.
Our investigative process was thorough and methodical. We collected licensing and billing data, installed covert surveillance cameras, reviewed hours of video, identified parents and employees, and calculated estimated overpayments based on actual attendance. Completed cases were then turned over to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension for search warrants, interviews, arrests, and potential prosecution. As our investigations progressed, we noticed a trend. Many of the centers receiving the highest levels of CCAP funding were owned and operated by Somali individuals, and the families served were predominantly Somali. This was not the basis for selecting cases, but it did become the basis for accusations against us. We were labeled as racially biased, despite the fact that our case selection was driven entirely by funding data. An outside review was launched into our investigative practices. We were questioned about how we selected centers and how we conducted surveillance. Following that review, new restrictions were placed on our work, including mandatory panel reviews before we could move forward with investigations. Investigators were also pulled from conducting new or current investigations in order to enter data from all previous complaints received by DHS into a newly created database, a process that took nearly a year to complete. These changes significantly hindered our ability to do our jobs effectively. Ultimately, in 2019, I chose to retire because the investigative process had become so constrained that meaningful work was no longer possible.
They put so much pressure on them, they destroyed their investigations. Well, Shirley grabbed headlines. It's actually the investigators' bombshell claims about being silenced that revealed the true depth of the cover-up. Citizen journalist and American hero Nick Shirley testifies in Congress on the rampant fraud. Let's keep going.
I saw the video. We watched it, and it looked like it was a number of facilities like in the same building.
Yes. So in one building, there was, I believe, 3 daycares, and there was no children. And they were all receiving CCAP funding for separate daycares. There's one daycare we went to that one day it was closed by the government, and then that same day it was reopened underneath another name. And they both received CCAP funding.
Yeah, that's just the beginning. Shirley's testimony about empty daycares buildings is about to get much more specific with actual evidence he presents to lawmakers. Now, this is a longer clip.
We go to a daycare, and I'm instantly surprised by what we see. We arrived, and it was an industrialized building, and there was 2 daycares registered at that building. And the first thing I noticed is all the windows are blacked out, and there's no footprints in the snow of any children. There's no playgrounds or anything that would make it look like it's a child care. But above me, a sign read, open 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. But there was nobody there. The doorbell did not even work. And then we continued to go to other daycares, and we noticed the same pattern. No children, blacked out windows, and one daycare, a learning center, spelled Quality Learning Center instead of Quality Learning Center. They had received $1.9 million, yet with that $1.9 million, they could not even spell leering right on their sign.
You'd think that they would be... You'd think they would have someone spell check the sign, right? Even at the sign shop. Hey, is this how you want to spell it? But none of them speak English over there anyway, so the misspelled sign received $1.9 million is just one red flag. Shirley's about to reveal the staggering scope of the fraud operation. Nick Shirley sending a shiver down the spine of every Democrat fraudster in America, particularly California. Watch this.
Correct.
What makes you think that?
Well, now you're seeing, since I've posted that video, lots of other people have started to go to other locations, for instance, in Ohio or in Maine or in California. They're also seeing the similar fraud take place in other daycares, for instance, in a lot of other locations.
Yeah, I have a particular interest in California, being from that state, and we know that there's been a lot of fraud. There was $32.6 billion that's been confirmed in unemployment insurance fraud. There's 1.2 million fraudulent community college applications. Have you gotten any sense, or have you seen any signs there that sort of are similar to what aroused your suspicions in Minnesota?
Yeah, and fraud in California might be worse than the fraud in Minnesota.
What makes you say that?
Well, $24 billion went missing for homelessness. They've been trying to build this train for years, yet there's hardly anything to prove for that. Fires.
Yeah, those are good points. So you look at let's run through a couple of those. Because I mentioned the areas where we have confirmed fraud, but then you also have these areas where you have so much spending, and then we look at what results from that spending, and there's nothing. So $24 billion in homelessness, and yet the homeless population went up. And a state audit found that they couldn't even figure out where the money went or what the outcomes linked to that spending were. Is that something that is kind of a red flag for you?
Yeah, it's a major red flag, and you don't even have to be smart to be able to know that that's a red flag.
Well, unfortunately, our state legislators haven't managed to figure that out, or at least the governor hasn't. So what are you saying about him?
They're not smart. No, but yeah, I mean, it's so obvious, and that's what we saw in Minnesota is how complicit the government has been in enabling this fraud to happen. Quality Learning Center had over 90 violations, yet they continue to give that daycare $1.9 million.
Think about what's happening here. He just ran down a few of the numbers in California alone. $24 million for homeless people, but homelessness rises. A train that goes to nowhere never even showed up at the station, right? And the state legislators don't know where it went. It's because all that money, it goes to the NGOs, the nonprofits, and then they say they're gonna execute the plan. Just because they have a fancy name. Just like these daycares. Shirley's Truth Nukes about tens of billions in fraud connect to an even bigger pattern of corruption involving far-left activists. Sounds like a RICO case. So typical of these people. A far-left agitator who organized the Minnesota church storming raked in over $1 million from anti-poverty nonprofit. What did I just say 15 seconds ago? Raked in over $1 million from an anti-poverty nonprofit. Where did they get that money? This RICO-level corruption in Minnesota is already being matched by federal investigations, finding massive fraud in other programs. Small Business Administrator Kelly Loeffler says they've already found 7,000 fraudulent small business loans in Minnesota, stealing $430 million from taxpayers. Add that to the list. You got the ghost daycares, the ghost transport companies, and I mean, it's just on and on. And now fraudulent small business loans. She found $3 million worth of fraud in 2 days of looking.
Administrator, fantastic to see you in person. So we hit the numbers. 6,900 borrowers suspended, about, $400 million in alleged fraud. We want to see jail time for these people as well. Is that on the way?
Look, this is in the future. There's handcuffs and jail time coming, because what we saw when we dug into it, it didn't take long when we scratched the surface within 2 days to find $3 million worth of fraud. Then it accumulated up to $430 million, 7,000 fraudulent borrowers. That's in one state. So we're getting to work, taking a deeper dive. We're sending those files over to federal law enforcement for prosecution, and then we're going on to the next state, and we're going to continue to follow through on this, because this is pandemic era fraud that the Biden administration tried to sweep under the rug, and it took money from deserving Main Street businesses. And we know how hard our small businesses work. They make up 99% of all the businesses in all of our states across the country.
Small business loan fraud is exploding, but it gets worse when you see how local media outlets are being threatened for investigating. Alpha News. Check this out. Autism provider sends a no trespass letter to Alpha News after reporters visited the site. During a visit last month, reporters observed no children on site. 3 adult employees were present and appeared defensive when asked basic questions at some point while Alpha News journalists were investigating. Reporters getting no trespass letters shows the intimidation tactics, which leads us to the political protection these fraud operations enjoyed. Judiciary Chairman, Committee Chair, blows the lid off Ilhan Omar and AG Keith Ellison's NGO fraud operation to enrich themselves and their campaigns, calls for an immediate investigation. Here is Jim Jordan with Benny Johnson.
You brought up the Feeding Our Future. This is such a strange series of events. I had no idea that Ilhan Omar was actually behind the loosening of federal regulations for meals served. And then
no, Benny. She's the one that wrote the bill. Oh, yeah. Clearly, you've been watching the Next News Network.
Old Ilhan Omar, who is now married to one of Keith Ellison's, the top campaign aides and so on, she had all of her friends then start defrauding the federal government after her bill passed. And I think it's high time that people start looking into Ilhan Omar. Where did she get all of her funds? Where did she get $30 million? How did she profit potentially from some of these scams? It seems like as soon as she passes a bill, the Somali community is lockstep to take advantage of it and defraud the federal government for hundreds of millions of dollars. Can you give us an update on investigations into Ilhan Omar? And
specific to the Congresswoman, that would take place in the Ethics Committee, which I think is appropriate. That's the right way to any type of examination of a member should be in the Ethics Committee. But the broader question is, it looks to me like it wasn't in Minneapolis and in Minnesota. It wasn't just, we're going to kind of look the other way. It was also that they were almost assisting in what was going on. And there were political reasons for doing so. For example, this program, Feeding Our Future, there was a point where it was actually cut off. The Department of Education in Minnesota was saying, we're not going to keep passing federal funds onto this organization. So they stopped it. And then a month later, they restarted. And I asked the question a couple of weeks ago in a hearing here in D.C. I said, why did it restart? And the answer given from one of the representatives in the Minnesota legislature says there was a threat of a racial discrimination lawsuit. So they played the race card. They did what the left typically does. The left will tell a lie. We're feeding kids. Media will report the lie. Oh, what a great program. And then when you tell the truth, no kids are getting fed, they call you a racist. And that's what they were planning to do and started to do. And then what did Minnesota, the elected officials and the government do? They turned the money back. They turned the spigot back on. And then the political advantages, because there was a meeting where the Attorney General met with some of the leaders in this program. And a few weeks later, he starts getting campaign contributions to his campaign. So that's the real angle I think we need to dig into in a broad way with the governor, the mayor, the attorney general, and anybody else.
Okay, so Jim Jordan making his points, explosive claims about Ilhan Omar and Keith Ellison's protection racket reveal how the fraud network spread beyond Minnesota. Home health care. Zombie offices, we found them all over Minnesota. Now we found them in Maine. They're fronts for home health care agencies, which federal prosecutors say is one of 14 high-risk programs for Medicaid fraud. Residents and building owners noticed it. Check this out. Here's from News Nation.
We're here in Portland, Maine. We found of the businesses that are registered in here, of the 20-something businesses, 10 of them are home health care businesses. As you can see, Prestige Home Care, Bright Star Home Care, Atlantic Community Support, 5 Stars Home Health Care, Prime Home Care, LLC. It's a trend we saw in Minnesota, one that the Minnesota House Oversight Committee on Fraud tells News Nation is a giant red flag. Large clusters of healthcare providers in one location. This building right behind me has 22 different home and community-based healthcare companies registered in the building. Inside this Portland office building, owner Ron Nevins agreed to speak with us.
I think I got 10 healthcare companies, which is probably about half, maybe a little less than half of this building.
Healthcare, home healthcare. I didn't even know what home healthcare was. Do you think these businesses are actually legit businesses?
Some, yes, but some I highly question. Nobody's ever here, and if it was 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but when there's 10, I've had as many as 12 or 13 probably before. The 5-star, I took the sign off the door because I'm trying to rent the office.
A state audit found that 5-Star Home Healthcare overbilled Maine's Medicaid by nearly $400,000, according to documents obtained by the Maine Wire. They failed to provide documentation to substantiate hundreds of thousands of dollars in Medicaid benefits paid out for home-based health care, and then the owner just abandoned the office.
I can't even reach him 6 months. No return calls, no return texts, nothing.
There's been no consequences, no investigation, no resolution to what happened with 5 Stars Home Health Care. And that, I think, is something, that's a story that we see play out time and time again.
You've been reporting on this for quite a long time here in Maine. How widespread do you think this issue is here?
Hundreds of millions of dollars, easily. It's, you look at just where we're standing right now, there are probably a dozen home healthcare agencies registered
right
here. We can see Ladna Home Healthcare down there. That's a $2 million home healthcare agency. You can see it's located right next to 2 money wiring services. Right next to it, you have Dahab Shield. The Dahab Shield is the official money wiring service of the Central Bank of Somalia.
You don't know what's going on behind the scenes,
Does it bother you?
Well, it ticks me off if they're screwing the state of Maine, and because that's my tax money, You add up what's going on all over the state of Maine, it's probably millions and millions of dollars of fraud and abuse.
I was about to search up if Illinois. I haven't looked in Chicago. I need to find out just how many home health care services there are, because it's happening in Illinois. Maybe it's time for a Franchi investigation. These zombie offices aren't just a Minnesota problem. The fraud model is being replicated in other states across America. Nick Shirley brought national attention to the alleged Minnesota fraud. National attention is what the story needs, but now we're seeing the political momentum building behind the accountability. Chad Caton writes, "Could not be prouder of my dude, Nick Shirley. Stands strong today on the Hill."
I'm here today to speak on behalf of all hardworking, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens here inside of the United States. I've helped bring to light widespread fraud that's happening inside our nation, and we the people have had enough of our hard-earned money going towards fraudsters as if it's no big deal. As I speak here, I want to ask everyone a question. How much do we trust when we pay our taxes it's going to benefit our nation? People erupted during the Boston Tea Party over just a few percentages as they believed they were being taxed without representation. Nowadays, we have the representation, but do we trust our representatives? My name is Nick Shirley, and I made a 41-minute video that I posted on platforms like X and YouTube. My video received over 100 million views, and it created instant change within our government. As the federal government launched investigations and departments such as Health and Human Services froze over $185 million in child care funding until businesses can prove they are legitimate businesses. I actually became aware of the fraud that was happening in Minnesota in June of 2025 as I was there for a separate video in Minnesota and started reaching out to me, asking me if I was making a video on the fraud. I said, well, what fraud? And this lady, she was a real estate agent, and she says, well, I'm having a hard time selling my properties because people are curious about these assisted livings that are popping up next door to some of the houses that we're buying or the home health care clinics that are popping up, and we don't know who's next to these houses that we're trying to sell. And I said, well, I'm not going to come and make a video if I don't have any proof. So therefore, I left Minnesota, and I continued to look for fraud in the best way I could. And as I was getting my own information, a man by the name of David reached out to me, and he said, hey, I have been investigating this fraud for years now. I have been driving by these child care centers. I have never seen a single child, and I have received the information from the state of Minnesota as to how much money these places are receiving. I said, great, let me come to Minnesota, and we'll make this video about potential fraud that was taking place inside of Minnesota. We go to a daycare, and I'm instantly surprised by what we see. We arrived, and it was an industrialized building, and there was 2 daycares registered at that building. And the first thing I noticed is all the windows are blacked out, and there's no footprints in the snow of any children. There's no playgrounds or anything that would make it look like it's a child care. But above me, a sign read, open 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. But there was nobody there. The doorbell did not even work. And then we continued to go to other daycares, and we noticed the same pattern. no children, blacked out windows, and one daycare, a learning center, spelled Quality Learning Center instead of Quality Learning Center. They had received $1.9 million, yet with that $1.9 million, they could not even spell leering right on their sign. Governor Walz has said he's been fighting fraud in Minnesota since 2019 and said the buck stops with him. However, how long would it take for you to notice $1 million leaving your bank account and not knowing where it's going? That's essentially what had been happening in Minnesota for years as billions of dollars has been misplaced. And meanwhile, while people like Governor Tim Walz call people like me a white supremacist, delusional conspiracy theorist, he actually decided to drop out of re-election because I believe of how deep and extensive this fraud is. Thank you very much. Since my reporting, the HHS department froze over $185 million, and to this day, not a single business has been able to prove proof of legitimacy. How fast would you be proving that you are a legitimate business if you have children to actually feed and to take care of? You'd be sending in that paperwork instantly. I made this video to document the widespread fraud that has been taking place, as I truly believe all fraud is bad. And people like me, my generation, we're sick of seeing tax dollars go towards fraud. We just want to have the same opportunities that our fathers and our grandparents had. And when you see people making millions of dollars by committing fraud, it upsets everybody from all age demographics. And so I hope today we can have a good conversation, and I think we can all agree that fraud is bad and that fraud is fraud. And I wish the best for our country, and I think that's what needs to be happening, is to crack down on all forms of fraud. So thank you for having me, and God bless the USA.
Thank you, Mr. Shirley.
God bless Mr. Shirley. The grassroots support for Shirley shows why citizen journalism is becoming the last line of defense against institutional corruption. Here's Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill protecting state and federal child care dollars and holding Governor Walz accountable.
Hello, I'm HHS Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill.
And I'm Alex Adams, HHS Assistant Secretary for the Administration for Children and Families.
I just returned from Minnesota, where I met with whistleblowers and confronted state officials about welfare and Medicaid fraud. I also visited a former cannery that claims to house dozens of Medicaid providers. We're stopping Minnesota and other states from allowing federal funds to be diverted into scams.
We are also closing Biden-era loopholes in child care regulations that made fraud easy to perpetrate and harder to catch. In our last episode, we asked viewers to report suspected fraud through our tip line on childcare.gov. We've already received more than 500 tips, which we are investigating. Along with those tips, we also received unsolicited commentary about our performance. We thought we'd share a few of them with you.
Why does this feel like a late-night class action lawsuit commercial? Do you or a loved one have mesothelioma? Call 1-800.
They look like injury claim lawyers that have the nickname The Hammer on a billboard in rural Indiana.
These are the kind of nerds that will save the union.
These two bookworm assassins look like the only thing they possess is the time to f people up.
You know that these guys know how to crunch numbers.
We do. I'm getting strong Bert and Ernie energy.
You're Bert. These dorks are amazing. They found policies that enable the massive fraud. They're stopping it. And they got in front of a camera to explain it to us. This is what I want my government to be.
I love these guys. The vibe feels like behind the camera people being told they need to wear a suit tomorrow.
Please keep the comments coming. But seriously, folks, every dollar stolen from these programs is stolen from working families who need it. Please continue reporting suspected fraud at childcare.gov. With your help, we can stop the scams.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
So here is the smoking gun that changes everything. HHS has received over 500 fraud tips in just weeks since launching their investigation. 500 reports of systematic welfare fraud across multiple states. Nick Shirley didn't just expose Minnesota's corruption. He uncovered a nationwide criminal network that's been bleeding taxpayers dry for years. The Biden administration created the loopholes, and now Trump's team is plugging them one by one. This is exactly why we needed someone like Trump back in office. Career politicians like Tim Walz thought they could run these scams forever, but whistleblowers like Nick Shirley they're proving that truth always finds a way. When federal investigators have to personally fly to Minnesota because the corruption is so deep that normal channels don't work, you know we're dealing with something massive. The real question is how many other states are running similar operations right under our noses. Do you think this Minnesota fraud empire goes all the way to the top? Let me know in the comments. And while you're there, check out the Next News merch shop for gear that shows you're awake to what's really happening.
The system controls information. Information control is power. They don't want you to see this. The truth only survives together. They don't want this shared. Share this now.